This is the Sandmasons Masterclass, one complete video where I'll share everything I've learned over the past 3 years of experimenting, designing, and building with this kit. If you're watching this, it means you're a Kickstarter backer, and you've been instrumental in helping me bring the Sandmasons project to life. I want to thank you so much for that. It's been a real challenge getting to this point, but also an incredible amount of fun. I've learned a lot along the way, and I'm genuinely grateful for your support. None of this would have been possible without you. I also want to thank the people who had early access to the prototype kits. A lot of what you'll see in this masterclass has been shaped by their feedback, photos, and ideas. They came up with creative ways to use the forms that I never would have thought of on my own. In this masterclass, I'll start with an overview of the kit and what's included. Then we'll go over some general sandcastle building tips, and then we'll move into detailed walkthroughs of how to build towers and walls. Finally, we'll finish with tips on details and finishing touches to make your castle truly your own. Before we move on to the content, I just want to mention that I've added bookmarks to this YouTube video so you can easily skip to any part of the masterclass, whether you want to review a specific step or jump straight to the building sections. And lastly, I'm really excited that so many of you have your kits now. People have been sending me pictures and videos of the castles they've made, and I'm always surprised by the creative ways they've figured out how to use the Sandmasons kit. I can't wait to see what you'll come up with once you start building. Let's start by taking a quick look at what's inside your Sandmasons kit. The core of the kit are the Sandmasons forms. These come in 3 colors, yellow, blue, and green. Each one has a red peg on the side, which lets you connect one form to another. It's a simple system that makes it easy to build walls and towers that fit perfectly together. The red pegs can also be locked in the raised position, a small but handy feature that makes it easier to handle the forms when you're setting up your structures. The yellow form also has an extra feature, the anchor peg. You can use it to hold the form in place while you're filling it with sand. I mostly use it when I'm building walls, but sometimes it comes in handy for more complex builds too. You'll quickly get a feel for when to use it. Next up is the door maker. It's made up of 2 pieces that can be used in a couple of different ways to create clean doorways or arches in your castle. I'll show you exactly how that works later in the video. Then there's the brick maker. This one's for adding bricks on and around your castle. The shovel's pretty straightforward. It's great for digging, filling your forms, and packing sand firmly into place. The carver is for cleaning up and refining your castle, and it also has a special feature that helps you make straight, even walls, and we'll get into that when we start building. And because of your incredible support on Kickstarter, the kit also includes the 2 stretch goal items, the bucket bag and the flags. The bucket bag is great for carrying your kit, collecting water, or rinsing your tools when you're done, and it folds up neatly for storage. The flags add a fun finishing touch to your castles and bring them to life. You also might notice that the shape of the flag matches the Sandmasons logo. And that's the Sandmasons kit. Everything's designed to work together, and in this masterclass, I'm going to show you how to get the most out of it. Before we get into the details of using the Sandmasons kit, I want to go over a few basics about sandcastle building that I've learned over the last few years. When I first started, I didn't think there were many tricks to building sandcastles, but I was wrong. There are a few simple things that make a huge difference in how your builds turn out. The first one is actually a few tips in one, and it's all about starting with the moat. If you start by digging out your moat, you not only get a good warm-up and some exercise, but you also build up the center area with the sand from the moat. That creates a nice hill for your castle to sit on, and castles always look way more impressive when they're built up on a little hill. One essential tool that isn't included with the kit, but I think is absolutely worth bringing, is a full-sized shovel. If you want to dig a proper moat, build a large structure, or move sand around quickly, a real shovel makes the job much easier. If you're serious about building a big castle, bring a shovel along. Starting with the moat has another big advantage. The sand you dig up from below the surface usually has the perfect moisture level for building. The top layer of sand dries quickly in the sun, but the sand that's just below it holds a bit of moisture, and that's the good stuff. So down in the moat, that's where the great sand is. It packs better, it holds its shape longer, and it gives you a sturdier build overall. When you're building sandcastles, your castles will look a lot better and last a lot longer if you pay close attention to 2 simple things: how damp your sand is and how firmly you pack it. If you get those 2 things right, your builds will hold up beautifully. But if you don't, you might end up with something like what you're seeing in this time lapse. Here I accidentally mixed some dry sand in with the good damp sand, and you can see the real difference. On the left, the section built with properly damp sand is solid and smooth, and on the right, where I used sand that was a bit too dry, it started crumbling almost immediately. and by the time I finished the castle, that whole section on the right looked pretty rough, while the rest of it, built with the right sand, still looked perfect. So don't make that mistake. Always use damp sand for your towers and walls, and make sure you pack it in firmly as you go. If you need more damp sand, you can always use the bucket bag to add water to your sand. Sometimes I just pour a bit of water into the bottom of the moat, let it drain for a minute, and then use that damp sand for building. How much water you need really depends on the beach. Finer sand holds together better, while coarse sand needs a little extra water. Some beaches even have sand that feels a bit like clay. That kind of sand is great for strong, long-lasting castles, and you can even go taller than you can at a normal beach, but it takes way more effort to pack tightly into the forms. Where you choose to build on the beach will also decide whether your castle survives the tide or not. That's a personal choice. If you want to see it get taken by the waves, that's up to you. Either way, it helps to check local tide charts online so you know where the water is coming in and going out, and you can usually spot the high tide line right on the beach. Okay, let's go over some basics on how to use the Sandmasons Kit. You can unpack the pieces of the kit easily by grabbing the 2 red pegs at the top and giving it a little flick. The pieces will separate right away. When you're setting up, I find it easiest to connect the forms right on the sand instead of holding them in the air. That way they stay stable while you build. Start by arranging your forms into the shape that you want to make. For this demonstration, I'm just using a simple shape. Once you've got it in place, start filling it with sand. As mentioned earlier, one of the most important steps is packing the sand down firmly. The more effort you put into packing, the smoother and sharper your finished castle will look. When the form is full, use the shovel to scrape the top flat so you have a nice, even surface. And now it's time to remove the form. Start by lifting one of the red pegs until it clicks. Use 2 hands here, one to hold the form steady and the other to lift the peg. This keeps the forms from shifting and gives you more control. There's also a little bit of play in the design here that helps. After lifting the first peg, you can gently flex the forms open just slightly. This small amount makes it easier to lift the second red peg and helps release the sand cleanly without scraping or messing up the surface of your castle. Once both pegs are lifted, you can carefully peel the forms away. Usually lifting 2 pegs is enough unless you're working with a more complex shape. When you're done, you can leave the 2 halves of the form connected so you can quickly reset them for your next section. And remember, the more careful you are when peeling the forms away, the cleaner your results will be. Okay, now it's time to move on to a more advanced build where we've got a bigger structure and we're stacking our towers. For this section, we're going to use the Sandmasons Gate building as an example. It's called that because it's based on the Sandmasons logo, and that logo in turn is based on the Hamburg City logo, which is where I live. We're going to use most of the pieces of the kit to make this building. Step 1 is to make sure your base is relatively level so your tower stands straight. Step 2, and this one I personally forget the most, don't forget to put the door maker in place before you start filling with sand. There's a small ridge along the bottom of the door maker that tucks underneath the form, and the form will hold it in place while you build. I also like to pack some sand around the door maker right away. That way, if you're using a big shovel to fill this section, the sand won't knock it loose or move it out of position. Once it's packed in nicely, it'll stay exactly where you want it. You'll see here what I mean. Now you can fill the bottom section with sand and pack it in firmly, smoothing off the top when you're done. If you're a little too aggressive while smoothing like I was here, just add a bit more sand and re-smooth it. The top doesn't need to be perfect yet. We'll be adding towers and cleaning up the top part later. Next, we'll add the first top tower. There are 3 in total, so we'll add them one by one. Here we're adding the first one and then moving on to the second. Notice how I'm holding the form with one hand while I fill it with the other. I've got a small pile of damp sand just below the tower that I'm pulling from, and every now and then I'll grab a bit more damp sand from inside the moat to keep the pile fresh. That way I'm always working with good, damp sand for the entire fill. Remember, damp sand combined with packing in the sand nicely is the key to making your castle look great and last a long time. Let's skip ahead here to removing the forms. You can see that after lifting the pegs, I'm gently peeling the forms outward before pulling them away completely. That little bit of flex helps the sand release cleanly and keeps the surface texture intact on the castle itself. We don't need to clean up the top too much here, since we'll be adding more towers on top and can tidy everything up later when we're finished. You can see here I'm using the big shovel to add to the sand pile I'm using for this tower. That gives me a steady supply of nice, damp sand, exactly what you want for a strong, long-lasting castle. Now we'll move on to the second tower. This one goes on the back right side, and then we'll add another on the back left. The process is pretty much the same as the first tower. Fill, pack, smooth, repeat. The only difference here is that we need to be a bit more careful when removing the forms so that we don't accidentally damage the front tower we've already built. If you do nick it a little, it's usually not a big deal. That area tends to be hidden anyway. But with a little care, it's easy to remove the green form cleanly without damaging anything. You can see I'm using the carver now to clean up the top area between the three towers. This is the last chance to reach this spot before it's closed in, so I'm taking a moment to tidy it up now so it'll look good in the final build. As I place the last tower, I'm paying attention to where I position the red pegs, so that when it's time to remove the forms later, it'll be easy to separate this tower without damaging the two towers already in place. You can also see I don't forget to get some more damp sand from inside the moat to make sure that my castle is going to look great when we're done. As I fill the last tower with sand, you can see that I'm using my left hand to block the shovel from spilling any sand into the cleaned area. It's doing double duty, keeping the form steady while I fill and also keeping the space between the towers clean. You can see here I've flicked some extra sand off the red pegs to make sure none of it falls onto the top of the tower when I lift them up. Then I carefully start removing the remaining green forms, bending them slightly outward, and peeling them away slowly. Finally, I take off the last green form, and the top tower is complete. Now I'm using the carver to clean up the top, smoothing everything out and giving it a nice, finished look so that it's ready for when we want to add the bricks. For larger builds, especially when the sand is heavy or you're stacking multiple stories, there can be extra pressure on the red pegs, which makes them harder to lift. You can release some of that pressure by giving the forms a gentle squeeze before pulling the pegs up. I also like to hold the forms steady when I lift the first peg. That prevents them from scraping against the side of the castle and messing up the surface texture. You can see here I'm holding the forms in place as I lift the peg, then gently pulling them back. I'm peeling the forms away from most of the castle's surface first, before separating them into two pieces and removing them completely. Remember that door maker we put in at the start? Well, now that the forms are off, we can take it out. When you're using the door maker inside a building, some sand will often get pushed down in front of it. Don't worry about that. You can clean it up easily with the carver. As you can see here, I'm using the carver to clear away any loose sand around the frame, and that helps ensure that when I pull the door maker out, it leaves a clean edge instead of breaking off chunks of sand from the castle wall. Now we just grab the little peg that's sitting in the middle of the inside of the door maker. It's there just so that you've got something to grab onto when you want to pull the door maker out. Next, I'm using the back of the carver to lightly tap down any bits of sand that are sticking out, just to tidy things up. Then I'll scrape out a little of the extra sand inside the doorway to make the passage, or hallway, whatever you want to call it, look smoother and more defined. Now let's move on to using the brick maker. The brick maker has a simple 3-finger grip. Place your index finger through the hole, rest your middle finger along the side ridge, and use your thumb to press the spring that pushes the sand bricks out. When you first get your brick maker, you might need to check the spring. The 2 small tabs on the spring should sit above the top blue piece. If they've slipped inside, just push the spring back up until they're in place. The spring also limits how far you can press down, so you can't overcompress it. To make bricks, grab some damp sand from your sand pile and lightly press it into the brick maker. If you press too softly, the sand will fall out. If you press too hard, it might get stuck. Don't worry, you'll quickly get a feel for the right amount of pressure. When placing a brick on your castle, don't hold the brick maker directly over it. If the sand falls out, it could damage whatever you've already built. Instead, hold the brick maker sideways about 90 degrees to the surface. Then, when you're in position, turn it upright, Hover just a millimeter or two above the spot and press the spring gently. The brick will pop out neatly right where you want it. If the quality of your bricks starts to drop off, just give the inside of the brick maker a quick wipe with your shirt or a towel. Sometimes a bit of sand buildup inside can affect the shape, and a quick clean will have it making perfect bricks again. Now we just add a flag and that's it. We built the Sandmasons Tower, and you've learned a lot more about how to use the Sandmasons Kit. Now let's move on to the next part, building walls. Building walls to connect your towers together is one of the things that sets the Sandmasons Kit apart from every other way of building sandcastles. This is what makes it possible to create something that actually looks like a realistic castle, and in fact, wall building was the main reason I came up with the Sandmasons Kit in the first place. So for me, it's a special part of the process, and I love building walls with the kit. There's two main ways that I use the Sandmasons Kit to build walls, but there's no single right or wrong method. And in fact, I'm sure there's probably more than two ways to do it, but these are the two that I use most often. The first method is the one you're seeing here. We've arranged the forms in a U shape using one of the small blue forms as the base of the U. And at the top of the U, there are two more blue forms turned 90 degrees outward. This setup lets us slide the U shape right up against a tower, creating a clean wall edge that closes off the section of the wall nearest the tower. This arrangement keeps the wall straight and maintains the exact width we want. Walls built this way look great, though the method takes a bit more care and the walls aren't quite as sturdy as the other approach. Still, it's a technique I often use because the results look great. Here you can see that we've positioned the forms and used the anchor pegs to hold the bottoms in place so they don't spread while packing sand. However, the top will spread if we start packing sand in, and that's why we use the carvers. There are two small notches on the back of each carver that slide perfectly over the ridge on the top of the yellow forms. That locks the top edge in place and keeps the yellow forms at the right width so that while we're packing in sand, everything stays nice and stable and in the right shape. Once the sand is packed, just remove the carvers, lift the anchor pegs, and peel away the form. You don't even need to take it apart. Normally, you can just pull it away on the sides and slide it over to start your next section. Now we're ready to extend the wall. When you're starting the next wall section, you need to make a little bit of overlap between the empty form and the existing wall so that there's no space there. One neat little trick is to make the overlap equal to the width of one yellow form, and that way the texture lines up perfectly and the wall looks seamless. When you remove the yellow forms, the anchor pegs leave small holes in the sand. You can use these holes as a guide when lining up the first yellow forms for your next wall section. Doing that ensures your textures match perfectly, keeping the wall pattern continuous and seamless. Pinch the form onto the overlap section, push the anchor pegs down to hold everything in place, add the carvers on top, and we're ready to start packing sand for the next section. You can push the sand toward the wall that's already there to create a strong connection between the two sections. Cleaning up the top before removing the forms also helps keep the upper edges of your wall looking sharp and even. Now let's take a look at another way to make walls. This method is quicker and makes it easier to add angled turns or variations in your layout. It's also more flexible when it comes to the wall's width. With this method, we don't close off the end of the wall forms with that last blue piece. The downside here is that without the blue piece, the forms don't hold each other vertically, so it's hard to get that perfectly polished look. But that's also the upside. It allows you to place the yellow forms as far apart as you want, so you can have a very wide wall if you like, and you can angle them inwards if needed so that you can have a strong, wide base and a narrow top. With this method, you use the red anchor pegs to keep the forms in place while you fill them in. You can see here I'm loosening the anchor pegs first, and that makes them easier to push into the sand once you position the wall where you want it and set the angle. Here I've got my wall piece up against the tower exactly where I want it. I've got the angle I want, and then I just gently press down the anchor pegs. If you use two hands while you're filling, the process goes quickly. Hold the tops of the forms steady with one hand and then fill and pack the sand with the other. Keep moving along the wall, filling each section as you go. Once the forms are full, just clean off the top and peel them away to reveal your wall. This is for me the funnest part because you've done all the hard work, you've done all the digging and the packing, and you've scraped everything off, and now it's just a quick pull away with the forms, and you've got a really nice looking wall underneath. So you get this really cool reveal every time you do it. It's very easy now to move on to the next section. You just pinch the wall on like you did with the other wall building method. Here I'm just cleaning off some leftover sand from the previous digging. Then I'm using the same method we talked about earlier to make sure the textures line up perfectly. I'm placing the form so that the first anchor peg lines up with the hole left by the last anchor peg from the previous section we built. That way the pattern continues smoothly and the wall looks like one continuous piece. Now I just go ahead and do the exact same thing on the other side. Now let's skip ahead to the part where we connect the wall we built to the tower at the other corner of the castle. This is super simple to do. We just make sure there's a bit of overlap at the end of the wall that we've already built, and then we flip the forms around so that the small blue forms face toward the tower we're connecting to. That lets us butt the forms right up against the tower, making a nice smooth connection, and it leaves the open ends so that they overlap slightly with the wall we've already built. This approach means we don't have to worry too much about the exact distance between the two towers. We can adjust it by changing the number of forms in the wall sections, or by varying the amount of overlap we have. Unless the towers are extremely close together, it's very easy to connect them using the Sandmasons Kit. Now we're just using the same two-hand method we've been using all along to fill in this last section of wall. Because we packed the sand so well when we built the tower and the previous wall section, we can confidently press the sand towards both sides, the tower and the wall, to create a solid connection. This also helps the wall hold its texture for longer. Remember, the better you pack the sand, as long as it's damp, the longer that texture will last. And keeping that clean texture is what makes your castle look great in photos. And that's pretty much it for wall building. By now we've covered both towers and walls, and the core parts of what makes a Sandmasons kit so unique. These two elements are really the heart of the system, and once you've mastered them, you can build just about anything you can imagine. You got a lot of flexibility to experiment, you can build wider walls, you can vary the height, you can mix in different shapes. It's totally up to you. In the next section, we'll go over a few extra tips and tricks, small details and techniques that didn't quite fit into the main parts, but can make a big difference in your builds. We've already shown how to use the door maker when building towers, but you can also use it for round towers, as you can see here. The process is exactly the same. The small ridge on the bottom doesn't sit quite as neatly under a round tower, but if you pack the sand firmly, just like we did in the tower section earlier, it'll stay in place nicely. I actually think these round tower doors look really good. Here I'm using my finger to clean up the sand around the edges of the door before pulling it out with the peg in the middle. Then I'll use the carver to tidy up the area around the tower and clear out any loose sand inside the doorway to give it a smoother, cleaner look. You can also use the door maker to create arched doorways or passageways through your walls. To do that, place the two door maker pieces back to back and slide them into the wall. The wall should be about one blue form wide, or roughly half the width of a yellow form, for this to work properly. It can be a little wider, but not too much. In the setup I've built here, the wall is about one blue form wide, which lets the door maker sit snugly between the yellow forms on each side, creating a clean, arched passageway through the wall. Now I'm cleaning up around the edges of the door makers on both sides, then using the pegs in the middle to carefully slide them out at the same time, one hand on each side. I pull them out evenly, and that leaves a nice, cleanly shaped arched doorway. Moving on, one thing I like to do to make my towers look a bit more impressive is make them appear even taller by building them on top of a big flat hill of sand. We talked about that earlier on in the course. But to make them look bigger, what I like to do is push the texture of the castle into the hill itself so it looks like part of the tower, or like the tower's sitting on another castle level. Here I'm using a couple of yellow forms and pressing them into the side of the hill to create that same castle wall texture. It makes the hill look like it's part of the structure, and you can go all the way around the hill to create what looks like an outer wall around your keep. Add a few bricks along the top edge and it really starts to look impressive. You don't have to stick to just the flat yellow walls either. You can use other shapes to add corners or different angles. You can do this along the top of the hill, or you can do it along the bottom of the hill, or all the way around the hill. It's a great way to finish off that big pile of sand and make your build look even cooler. Another tip for making the area around your towers look great is to make good use of the shovel. It's designed with square corners and flat edges, which make it really versatile. You can use it to flatten the ground around your towers, carve stairs, or shape small cliffs and ledges into the hills your towers sit on. It's a simple tool, but there's a lot you can do with it. And that's it for the Sandmasons Masterclass. Thank you so much for watching, and an even bigger thank you for being a Kickstarter supporter. None of this would have been possible without you. If you haven't already, please follow me on Instagram @Sandmasons, where I share new builds, ideas, and behind-the-scenes updates. And if you built something cool with your Sandmasons kit, I'd love to see it. Please share your photos or tag me so I can check them out. If you have ideas for other topics or sections you'd like me to cover in a future update to this masterclass, let me know. I'm always learning from how others use the kit, and your creativity helps me make this project even better. Thanks again for watching, and I can't wait to see what you build.